They nursed their mother's madness until she had nothing left to give. Before we descend into the shadows of Blackwood Ridge, I need to know, where are you listening to this story from? Are you alone in your room, walking through empty streets, or perhaps driving on a dark road? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to follow this journey to its end, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear was deliberately erased from history. There's a reason no one speaks of the Blackwood twins, and by the end of this you'll understand why. Now, let us begin where the records refuse to go. Blackwood Ridge was not a town. It was barely a settlement. A scattering of wooden homes clinging to the side of a forested hill in rural Pennsylvania, accessible only by a single muddy road that wound through pine and shadow. In 1847, it was home to no more than 30 souls, most of them farmers, trappers, or those who had simply run out of places to run. The winter that year arrived early and stayed long. Snow piled against doorframes, smoke rose thin and grey from chimneys. And in the last house at the edge of the ridge, where the trees pressed closest and the wind howled like something dying, a woman named Constance Thorne gave birth to twin daughters. There was no doctor present. No midwife had been willing to make the journey. Constance's husband, Elias, stood outside the bedroom door with his fists clenched and his jaw tight, listening to his wife scream until she couldn't anymore. When the door finally opened, the silence that followed was worse than any sound. The twins were identical, pale as candle wax, with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow light. They did not cry. Not when they were born, not when they were cleaned. Not even when the cold air touched their skin for the first time. They simply stared, first at each other, then at the room, then at their mother, who lay trembling and soaked in sweat on the bed. Elias named them Violet and Iris. He thought the names sounded gentle, hopeful, but Constance barely acknowledged them. She turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes, her lips moving in some soundless prayer or plea. The neighbors noticed the silence first. Most newborns filled a home with noise, cries, coos, the soft chaos of life beginning. But the Thorne house remained as quiet as a crypt. When the local minister, Reverend Calloway, visited a week after the birth, he found Constance sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, the twins cradled in her arms, staring at him with unblinking eyes. "They don't sleep much," Constance said softly, her voice hollow. "They just watch." Calloway tried to smile. "All children are curious, Mrs. Thorne." "Not like this," she whispered. "They're waiting for something." The Reverend left quickly. He did not return. By the time the twins were 3 years old, the unease had spread like frost across the ridge. The girls were inseparable, moving in perfect synchronization, walking, turning, even breathing in rhythm. They rarely spoke, and when they did, it was only to each other in whispers no one else could hear. They would stand at the edge of the property for hours, watching the tree line, their small hands clasped together. Elias tried to raise them as normal children. He taught them to churn butter, to gather eggs, to recite their prayers. But Violet and Iris learned too quickly. They anticipated his instructions before he gave them. They finished his sentences. And sometimes, late at night, he would wake to find them standing at the foot of his bed, just staring. Constance deteriorated. She stopped eating regularly, stopped brushing her hair. She would sit for hours with a blank expression, her hands trembling in her lap. When neighbors asked if she needed help, she would only say, "They're always hungry. They take, and I have nothing left." No one understood what she meant. Then the animals started dying. It began with the chickens. Elias found them one morning, scattered across the yard, necks broken, wings splayed. There were no signs of a predator, no teeth marks, no blood, no tracks in the dirt, just death, sudden and inexplicable. A week later, the Calloway family's cow collapsed in the field. Healthy one moment, dead the next. The vet from the next town over could find no cause. "Heart failure," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Then old Mr. Brennan, who lived 2 houses down, fell ill after passing the twins on the road. He claimed they had smiled at him, just smiled, and by evening he was bedridden with a fever that wouldn't break. He died 3 days later, whispering about cold little hands and eyes that don't blink. People began to cross the street when they saw Violet and Iris coming. Mothers pulled their children indoors. The local schoolteacher refused to admit them to class, citing behavioral concerns, though she could never articulate what those concerns were. By the time the twins turned 7, the Thorne family was entirely isolated. Elias still went into town for supplies, but no one spoke to him. Shopkeepers took his money in silence. Women clutched their rosaries when he passed. And Constance stopped leaving the house altogether. Late one night, Elias woke to the sound of soft humming. He found his wife in the girls' bedroom, kneeling between their beds, running her fingers through their hair while they slept. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her lips moving in that same soundless prayer. "Constance," he said gently, "come back to bed." She didn't look at him. "They're feeding on me, Elias. I can feel it. Every day, a little more. They take my warmth, my thoughts. Her voice cracked, "My soul." "That's not—" "Look at them," she hissed, pointing at the sleeping twins. "Look closely. Do they ever look like children to you, or do they look like something else, wearing children's faces?" Elias wanted to argue, wanted to comfort her, but in the dim glow of the oil lamp, with the twins' faces smooth and expressionless in sleep, he found he couldn't answer. The next morning, Constance was gone. Elias searched the woods, the nearby creek, every trail and hollow he could think of. The neighbors helped reluctantly, but after 3 days the search was called off. No body was ever found, no note was left behind. Violet and Iris sat on the porch steps during the search, hands folded in their laps, watching the men come and go. When someone asked if they missed their mother, they tilted their heads in unison and said, "She's still here." No one asked what they meant. Elias tried to raise them alone, but the isolation and the whispers wore him down. He began drinking. He stopped maintaining the property. The house fell into disrepair, shutters hanging crooked, weeds overtaking the garden, the chimney smoke growing thinner and more infrequent, and the twins grew taller, quieter, more watchful. By the time they turned 18, Blackwood Ridge had learned to pretend they didn't exist. The house on the hill was simply avoided. The road past it was no longer traveled. It was easier that way. But on a frozen night in January of 1865, something changed, and the silence finally broke. The winter of 1865 was merciless. Snow had been falling for weeks, burying Blackwood Ridge under drifts that reached the windowsills. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling shutters and tearing shingles from roofs. People stayed indoors, huddled near their fires, rationing food and firewood, waiting for the thaw. But on the night of January 14th, a knock came at every door in Blackwood Ridge. It was Violet and Iris, moving from house to house in the storm, barefoot in the snow, their dark hair plastered to their pale faces, their eyes wide and unblinking. They carried no lantern, no coat, nothing to shield them from the cold, and yet they did not shiver. At each door they delivered the same message, spoken in perfect unison. "Our father is dying. Please come." Mrs. Brennan, the widow who had lost her husband years before, opened her door to find the twins standing on her porch, snowflakes melting on their cheeks, but not in their hair. "Elias is dying?" she asked, her voice cautious. The twins nodded slowly. Then, "Fetch the doctor." "Why come to me?" "He wants to confess," Violet said. "Before it's too late," Iris finished. Mrs. Brennan hesitated. She wanted to close the door. Every instinct told her to. But the twins' eyes held her in place, dark, deep, pleading. "Please," they said together. "He has so little time." Against her better judgment, Mrs. Brennan agreed. She bundled herself in a coat and followed the twins into the storm. They visited 6 more homes that night. The blacksmith, Mr. Carver, the schoolteacher, Miss Holloway, Reverend Calloway himself, now old and grey, the young couple, Daniel and Abigail Ross, who had only recently moved to the Ridge, and 2 others, men whose names would later be scrubbed from every record. Each of them agreed to come, some out of pity, some out of guilt, and some because refusing the twins felt more dangerous than obeying them. By midnight, all 8 of them stood in the Thorn house, shaking snow from their coats, their breath misting in the frigid air. The interior was worse than they'd imagined. Bare walls, broken furniture, the smell of damp wood, and something sour they couldn't name. Elias lay in a bed near the fireplace, his face gaunt and pale, his breathing shallow. He looked decades older than his 50 years. When he saw the gathered crowd, his eyes widened with something between confusion and terror. "What? Why are you all here?" "They said you were dying," Reverend Calloway said gently, approaching the bed. "They said you wanted to confess." Elias turned his head toward the twins, who stood silently in the corner, holding hands. "I didn't," his voice cracked. "I didn't ask them to bring anyone." The room went cold. Miss Holloway wrapped her arms around herself. "Then why did they—" The door slammed shut. Everyone spun toward the sound. Daniel Ross grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, throwing his weight into it, but the door might as well have been nailed shut. "What's going on?" Abigail whispered, her voice rising in panic. The twins stepped forward into the firelight. Their faces were calm, serene. "You all knew," Violet said softly. "But you did nothing," Iris continued. "Knew what?" Mr. Carver demanded, his voice sharp. "What are you talking about?" "About our mother," the twins said in unison. "About what you did to her." The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Reverend Calloway cleared his throat. "Your mother disappeared, girls. We searched for her. We tried—" "You didn't search," Violet interrupted, her voice still soft but edged with something cold. "You were relieved." "You wanted her gone," Iris added. "That's not true," Mrs. Brennan protested, though her voice wavered. The twins tilted their heads in perfect synchronization. "Then why?" Violet asked. "Did you tell her she was mad?" "Why?" Iris continued. "Did you call her dangerous? Why did you whisper that her children were cursed? That they should be taken from her? That she should be locked away?" The accusations came faster now, overlapping, the twins' voices rising and falling like a chant. "You isolated her. You shamed her. You made her believe she was broken, until she couldn't take it anymore." Reverend Calloway raised a shaking hand. "We were trying to help. You drove her into the woods," the twins said together, their voices now perfectly synchronized, resonant, filling the room. "And when she didn't come back, you were glad." Elias sat up in bed, his face stricken. "Girls, please!" But the twins weren't finished. "Our mother walked into the forest because you made her believe she was a monster, because you convinced her that we, her daughters, were something evil. She walked until she couldn't walk anymore. And when the cold took her, she was still whispering your names." Tears streamed down Violet's face, down Iris's face, identical tracks on identical cheeks. "We found her body 3 days later," Violet whispered. "We buried her ourselves," Iris said. "In the ground you wouldn't bless." The room was suffocating now. The fire flickered, shadows danced on the walls. "And tonight," the twins said together, their voices dropping to a whisper, "you will finally tell the truth." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. No one moved. No one spoke. The fire crackled, casting writhing shadows across the walls of the Thorn house, and in those shadows, something seemed to move, something that didn't belong to the people trapped inside. Reverend Calloway was the first to break. His voice came out hoarse, defensive. "We didn't kill her. We didn't lay a hand on Constance." "But you broke her," Violet said softly, her tears still wet on her cheeks. "Piece by piece." Miss Holloway pressed herself against the wall, her eyes darting toward the door. "This is insane. We came here to help. You came because you felt guilty." Iris interrupted, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "All of you. That's why you couldn't say no." Daniel Ross took a step forward, his jaw clenched. "Listen, I barely knew your mother. Abigail and I only moved here a year ago. We had nothing to do with—" "You didn't stop them," Violet said, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "You heard the whispers. You saw how they treated her, and you stayed silent." Abigail's voice trembled. "We were new. We didn't want to cause trouble." "Neither did she," the twins said in unison. The weight of those words settled over the room like snow, cold, heavy, suffocating. Mr. Carver, the blacksmith, ran a hand through his thinning hair. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and strong, but now he looked small, diminished. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice raw. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry, we all are. But your mother's death, that was a tragedy, not a crime." "It was both," Violet said. "And it will not be forgotten," Iris added. Mrs. Brennan stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. Her face was pale, her voice shaking. I told the Reverend that Constance was struggling. I thought she needed help, real help. I didn't mean for her to—" "You told him she was mad," Violet said flatly. Mrs. Brennan flinched. "I was worried about you girls. You were so strange, and she was so fragile." "She was exhausted," Iris said. "She was alone, and you made her feel like a failure. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have been kind," the twins said together. The fire flared suddenly, casting the room in harsh, flickering light. Elias sat upright in bed now, his face pale and drawn. He looked at his daughters with a mixture of grief and fear. "Girls," he said quietly, "this won't bring her back." "No," Violet agreed, "but it will be recorded." From the folds of her dress, Iris produced a small leather journal. The pages were yellowed, the edges worn. She opened it carefully, revealing lines of neat, careful handwriting. "We have been documenting everything," she said. "Every word spoken against our mother. Every rumor spread, every act of cruelty disguised as concern." Violet took the journal from her sister and held it up for the room to see. "And tonight we will add your confessions." Reverend Calloway's face twisted with indignation. "You cannot force us to—" "We're not forcing anyone," Iris said calmly. "The door is locked, yes, but not by us." Everyone turned to stare at the door. "Then who?" Daniel began, but the words died in his throat. Because now, in the dim light, they could all see it. The door handle was turning, slowly, deliberately, but no one was touching it. Abigail screamed, the handle stopped moving, the door remained shut, and in the silence that followed, a voice spoke, low, rasping, unfamiliar. "Tell them!" Everyone froze. The voice had come from Elias, but it wasn't his voice. His lips had moved, but the sound was wrong, distorted, like something speaking through him. His eyes rolled back in his head. His body went rigid. "Tell them what you did," Miss Holloway sobbed, sinking to her knees. "I told the school children not to play with the twins. I told their parents they were dangerous. I didn't believe it. Not really, but I was afraid of being blamed if something happened." "You were a coward," the voice said through Elias. "Yes," Miss Holloway whispered, her face in her hands. "Yes, I was." One by one, the others began to speak. Mr. Carver admitted that he had refused to repair the Thorne family's plough, hoping they would leave the ridge. Mrs. Brennan confessed that she had spread rumors about Constance hearing voices, about her being unfit to raise children. Daniel and Abigail Ross admitted that they had been warned not to associate with the Thornes when they arrived, and they had obeyed without question. And Reverend Calloway, his voice breaking, confessed that he had written to the county authorities, suggesting that Constance be committed to an asylum, though the letter had never been sent. As each confession poured out, Iris recorded it in the journal, her handwriting swift and precise. Violet stood beside her, her face expressionless, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. When the last confession was spoken, the voice left Elias. He collapsed back onto the bed, gasping for air, his body trembling. The door creaked open. Cold wind rushed into the room, extinguishing the fire. Darkness swallowed the house. In the blackness, the twins' voices echoed, "You are free to go, but you will carry this with you, every day, every night until your last breath." One by one, the visitors stumbled out into the snow, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. They did not speak to each other. They did not look back. By dawn, they had scattered. Some left Blackwood Ridge entirely. Others remained, but they never spoke of that night again. And the Thorn House stood silent once more. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood Ridge began to fray. It started with small things. Daniel Ross woke in the middle of the night to find himself standing in his yard, barefoot in the snow, with no memory of how he got there. Abigail found claw marks gouged into their bedroom door from the inside. Miss Holloway stopped sleeping. She claimed she could hear children whispering outside her window every night, though no one was ever there when she looked. Mr. Carver's forge went cold. No matter how much coal he fed the fire, it refused to stay lit. His tools rusted overnight. His hands shook so badly he could no longer work. Mrs. Brennan began seeing her late husband in mirrors, his face pale and accusing, his mouth moving soundlessly. And Reverend Calloway lost his faith. He stood at the pulpit one Sunday morning, opened his Bible, and found every page blank. He tore through the book, desperately searching for words that were no longer there. He collapsed in front of his congregation, weeping, unable to speak. No one could explain it. No doctor could diagnose it. No remedy could cure it. But everyone knew the source, the twins. They were seen walking the ridge at all hours, dawn, dusk, midnight, always together, always silent. They never aged. Their faces remained smooth and pale, their dark eyes unblinking. They seemed to exist outside of time, untouched by cold or hunger or fatigue. And wherever they walked, misfortune followed. Elias deteriorated rapidly. He stopped eating, stopped speaking. He would sit for hours, staring at the wall, his lips moving in soundless conversation with someone no one else could see. When neighbors checked on him, out of fear more than concern, they found him thinner each time, more hollow, as if something was slowly consuming him from within. One night, the local shopkeeper, Mr. Gaines, decided enough was enough. He gathered a group of men, those who hadn't yet fled or succumbed to madness, and marched to the Thorn House with torches and rifles. "We're not here to hurt anyone," he called out as they approached the porch. "We just want to talk. We want to understand." The door opened. Violet and Iris stood in the threshold, silhouetted against the darkness inside. They did not look afraid. "What do you want to understand?" Violet asked. Mr. Gaines swallowed hard. "What you are. What you're doing to us." "We're not doing anything," Iris said calmly. "Then why?" Mr. Gaines gestured helplessly at the men behind him. "Why are we falling apart?" The twins tilted their heads. "You're not falling apart," Violet said. "You're finally being honest." "About what?" one of the men shouted. "About who you are," Iris replied. "About what you've done." Mr. Gaines shook his head. "We confessed. We admitted our mistakes. What more do you want?" "We don't want anything," the twins said together. "But guilt does." Before anyone could respond, Elias appeared behind them. He was skeletal now, his skin stretched tight over bone, his eyes sunken and vacant. He moved like a puppet, jerky and unnatural. "She's still here," he rasped. "Constance. She never left." The men backed away, their torches flickering. "She's in the walls," Elias continued, his voice rising. "In the floor, in the air. She's watching. She's always watching." He lunged forward, and the men scattered, dropping their torches, fleeing into the night. Only Mr. Gaines remained, frozen in place, staring at Elias. "I tried to save her," Elias whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I tried, but I was too weak, too afraid, and they—" He pointed at the twins. "They know. They've always known." "Known what?" Mr. Gaines breathed. Elias's face twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. That I was the one who told her to go into the woods, that I couldn't protect her from you, from any of you, and that I was relieved when she didn't come back. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Gaines turned and ran. By morning, half of Blackwood Ridge was empty. Families packed what they could and left in the night, abandoning homes, livestock, everything. Those who remained locked their doors and windows, refusing to venture out after dark. And the twins continued their vigil, walking the ridge, waiting. 3 months after that frozen January night, Blackwood Ridge ceased to exist. Not physically. The houses still stood, the road still wound through the trees. But the name was struck from county records. Maps were redrawn, census reports were amended. Every document, every registry, every official mention of the settlement was systematically erased. It was not a natural process. It was deliberate, coordinated, thorough. The few survivors who had fled, those who had been in the Thorn House that night, scattered across Pennsylvania and beyond, they changed their names. They told no one where they had come from. And when asked about the scars on their hands, identical as if burned by invisible rope, they claimed not to remember. But they did remember, every night, in their dreams, because the twins visited them there. Miss Holloway, who had moved to Philadelphia and taken a position at a prestigious girls' school, woke one night to find Violet and Iris standing at the foot of her bed, hands clasped, eyes unblinking. "You taught children to fear," they whispered, "so you will know fear." She never slept soundly again. Daniel and Abigail Ross, who had fled to Ohio and started a new life, heard scratching at their windows every night, small hands scraping, scraping, scraping. Their neighbors heard nothing, no marks were ever found, but the Rosses heard it, always. Reverend Calloway spent his final years in a sanatorium, claiming he could see writing on the walls, confessions, names, accusations that no one else could see. He died trying to scrub them away with his bare hands. Mr. Carver hanged himself in his workshop. No note was left, but those who found him claimed his hands were positioned as if he were still trying to pray. And Mrs. Brennan simply disappeared. Her home was found empty, the door wide open, snow piling up inside. On the kitchen table was a single page torn from a journal, covered in handwriting that was not her own. She walked into the woods because you told her she was a monster. Now you will walk into yours. Elias Thorne was the last to die. He was found in the spring, when the snow finally melted, lying in the yard of the ruined house. His body was withered, desiccated, as if every drop of moisture had been drained from him, but his face was peaceful. As for the twins, Violet and Iris, they were never seen again, not by the survivors, not by anyone. The house on Blackwood Ridge still stands, though the forest has reclaimed most of it now. The roof has collapsed, the walls lean at dangerous angles, vines strangle the porch rails. But sometimes hikers report seeing lights in the windows at night, small, flickering like candles. And sometimes, if the wind is still, you can hear it, the sound of two young voices humming in perfect harmony. A local historian, Professor Elena Marsh, spent 10 years trying to uncover the truth of Blackwood Ridge. She found fragments, torn pages, burned letters, second-hand accounts whispered in nursing homes. She pieced together enough to know something terrible had happened, something that had been deliberately hidden. But when she tried to publish her findings, every archive she contacted claimed the documents had been destroyed. Every university she approached refused to validate her research. Every door she knocked on was closed in her face. She died of a heart attack in 2003, alone in her study, surrounded by papers. On her desk was a journal, leather-bound, yellowed with age, that had not been there the night before. Inside, in neat, careful handwriting, were 5 words. Some truths must stay buried. Beneath it, 2 signatures. Violet, Iris, The story of Blackwood Ridge is not taught in schools. It does not appear in history books. The land where it stood has been parceled off and sold, and new families have built homes there, unaware of what lies beneath. But the older residents of the surrounding towns still warn their children, don't wander too far into the woods. Don't follow lights you can't explain. And if you ever see two pale girls holding hands in the mist, walking through the trees in perfect step, run, because some stories are too dark to be written, and some ghosts don't need to be dead to haunt you. They just need you to remember. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone brave enough to listen. Subscribe for more tales that history tried to bury. And remember, some truths are dangerous not because they're false, but because they're real. Stay safe out there.